Hello everyone, saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por estar aqui na primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. Thank you very much, Professor Valentina, for your kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai. My talk is... Peraí, deixa eu voltar de novo.
Já sei. Agora que melhorou, né?
Sim, mas já sei. Agora, aqui eu já sei, agora tem que vir para cá, que eu estava no... É esse aqui, né? Segundo, tá. Pronto? Vamos lá.
Poxa, eu queria esse sem um corte, né, Ruber? Vamos lá, senão você não vai jantar hoje.
Hello, everyone. Saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por participar do primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for her kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai. So my talk today will address translanguage as a decolonial practice in language studies. So the presentation will be divided in four main parts. Firstly, tá bom, acho que foi bom, mas eu vou iniciar de novo. Tá muito...
Hoje vou conversar com vocês sobre não sei o que, não sei o que.
Não, eu não posso pedir do script, senão vai pior ainda. Tem que ser tá aqui mesmo.
Peraí, que
tá, não, tá, deixa eu só me concentrar.
Peraí que eu preciso tossir. Tá.
Hello everyone, saludo a todos. Para de fazer barulho. Você concorda? Peraí, ok.
Você vai ficar lá embaixo, então.
Ué, mas você fica aí em cima, você já tem... Vamos lá. Pronto, não, você me desconcentra daí. Ó,
tá bom.
Você tá em meu amuleto da sorte, mas fica
tá
quietinho.
Bom.
Hello everyone, saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por participar do primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Dr. Valentina for your kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai.
Para tudo.
Olha o teu braço aparecendo aí.
Não, filha, para separar. Eu acho que é importante você falar. Olá a todos, sou o professor Ruberval Franco Maciel, da Universidade Estadual de Mato Grosso do Sul.
Mas a legenda tá ali?
Tá, amigo, mas é um vídeo, não tem uma apresentação. Quando é uma palestra...
Não, é uma mesa. Uma pessoa vai apresentar quem vai falar uma sequência, a pessoa já me apresentou, aí vai vir, já tá legendado ali. É que nem você vai apresentar trabalho na frente e fala assim, eu sou fulano, todo mundo sabe, todo mundo vê aquele fulano todo dia.
Mas eu sempre falo, oi pessoal, eu sou fulano, sou de tal lugar, assim. Não precisa?
Não sei, porque é um painel.
Mas você fala, boa noite a todos, sou o professor Ruberval Franco Maciel, do Brasil, da Universidade Estadual de Mato Grosso do Sul.
Mas a pessoa já vai me apresentar, vai ter lido meu currículo.
Bom.
Aí eu vou entrar, é uma mesa redonda, só que ela é virtual.
Então tá bom.
Sabe por quê? De novo, como fulano falou, eu sou lá, mas a fulano já falou, por que você está falando?
Eu sempre falo, boa noite, pessoal, sou a professora Jaqueline Basso, vim de tal lugar.
Mas se alguém leu...
Mesmo alguém me apresentou, claro. Falo, boa noite, pessoal, eu sou a Jaqueline, hoje eu tô aqui com vocês, vamos conversar um pouco sobre isso, aquilo.
Eu não me apresento mais, se já me apresentaram, enfim.
Então tá bom, desculpa.
Então, vou dizer, então. Dá para te ver. Hello, everyone. I'm Ruberval Maciel, from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Saludo a todos. Estou muito feliz em poder participar do primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for your kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai. So my presentation will address basically about translanguage. So for this presentation, I'll divide it in four main parts. Firstly, I'll mention about what I mean by translanguaging as a decolonizing practice. Secondly, I'll move on to the multilingual churn movement. And after that, I'll discuss about translanguage theory and practice. And finally, I will focus on how I have resignified this concept for my local context, and particularly my strong interest to promote dialogues with Paraguayan applied linguists. I'd like to start by situating what I mean by decolonizing. This concept has been approached from many areas. I could mention some authors such as Menezes de Souza, Viveiros de Castro, Souza y Santos, Miolo, among others. But I'd like to revisit this book, Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature. So according to this author, the choice of language and the use to which language is put is central to people's definitions of themselves in relation to their nature and social environment, and indeed in relation to the entire universe. So according to this author, the colonization of politics is easy to be detected. The colonization of economy is easy to be detected. It defines knowledges, administration, economic exchange, legal practices, and so on. But the one of the mind is sometimes harder to be detected and eradicated. In this regard, language is very important. So let's move on to what Professor Ofelia Garcia has contributed a lot into this area. So as Ofelia Garcia reminds us, language is a tool of domination, conquest, and colonization throughout history. She calls attention to the limitation of named languages as autonomous entities. The idea of language as autonomous whole where one could add to another whole. So, on the other hand, if we think as language as complex and dynamic practices in which speakers engage to make meanings, named languages would reduce their power. So, in this regard, when language is considered autonomous related nation states, such labels such as the one you can see named languages here, foreign, second, heritage, first language emerge. So again, using these three pictures to demonstrate how they have different meanings and ideologies. So languages related to nation states imply that languages can be added as separate wholes without taking into account that multilingual speakers' repertoires are much more complex. It is important... me perdi. Agora eu vou ter que voltar de novo.
Não. Ele corta.
Eu já estava bem no comecinho.
Não estava, não.
Acho que está indo bem. Tá mais pausado? Você tá achando?
Não, tá mais natural, tá melhor. É. Mas eu ia sair daqui, que eu vou ficar lá na frente. Para te falar assim. Mas eu acho que não precisava voltar. Eu acho que ele pode cortar.
Mas vamos lá. Eu prefiro, porque agora eu tô pegando o ritmo. Eu tô mais calmo agora, mais...
Pegou o jeito, né? Peraí. Deixa eu desligar meu computador. Aí, peraí que eu vou te dirigir. Eu fico ali.
Às vezes concentra, não fica falando outra coisa. Nem abrindo boca, nem nada. Aí se descer lá, você vai na faca. O que tá vendo?
O computador não desliga.
Eu deixei ele assim. Algum lugar?
Eu quero pôr na mochila, peraí, deixa eu tirar o fio dali. Eu queria, peraí.
Ó, meu cartão tá aqui em cima.
Tá, mas eu queria pôr a...
Você vai fazer mais pausado, o smile.
Tá, mas aí... tá.
Mas vamos, depois você arruma.
Eu vou.
Tem toque.
Tem problema.
Não, me desconcentra.
Pra não esquecer. Ó, eu vou ficar aqui, eu vou ficar em pé aqui, não dá pra passar a cadeira, né?
Não.
Então, eu vou ficar assim. Se eu fizer assim, é para você olhar mais para cima.
Para não perder o ritmo, né?
Se eu fizer assim... Não, assim é para você olhar para cima.
Tá.
Se eu fizer assim, ó, sorri.
Tá bom.
E se eu fizer assim, vai devagar.
Ok. Hello, everyone. Sou o professor Berval Maciel, da Universidade Estadual de Mato Grosso do Sul. Bom, não, eu esqueci de falar inglês.
Eu ia falar, meu filho.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Estou muito feliz por estar aqui no primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. Um saludo a todos. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for your kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguay. So my talk is about translanguaging. So according to this title here, is Translanguaging as Decolonial Practice in Language Studies. So I'd just like to show the outline of this presentation. So the presentation will be divided...
Tá errado.
O quê?
O slide. Tem que pôr você pôs no layout errado. Mas tá bem melhor mesmo agora. Você tem que pôr aquele layout com outro, que tem outro tipo de quadradinho.
Peraí.
Volta lá. Ó. É esse aqui, ó, o segundo.
Ah, beleza.
Então volta e começa. Mas melhorou muito. Achei que ficou mais natural agora. É que agora a direção aqui vai
Estou
resolver.
feliz, tá.
I'm happy.
Tá bom. Tá, não, para de me desconcentrar. Tem que concentrar. Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Um saludo a todos. Estou muito feliz por estar aqui hoje no primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai. Agradecer a professora Valentina? Não. Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul, em Brasil. Ai, falei em português. Não.
Peraí, vamos lá. Vamos contar pra gente marcar. Como é que a gente marca? Vamos lá. 1, 2, 3, foi!
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Estou muito honrado por estar aqui hoje no primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. Um saludo a todos. Eu gostaria de agradecer Professor Valentina for her kind invitation.
Não, misturou português com
Mas é essa a ideia, eu estou falando de translinguagem.
Você vai misturar?
Sim, é essa teoria.
Inglês com português?
Sim, é a teoria que eu estou falando, que o Paraguai é o repertório linguístico do Paraguai. Eu estou fugindo da versão monolíngua.
Jesus, mas você não fez isso das outras vezes.
Não, mas se eu fizer isso, não tem problema.
Entendi, então tá bom.
Tá. Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Um saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por estar no primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for her kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai. So my presentation is about translanguaging. As in the title here, não estava na primeira. Agora tem que voltar. Tudo bem. Vamos lá. Agora eu peguei. Ok, vai lá.
Tá no primeiro?
Agora tá no primeiro.
Não tá no título.
Agora tá no título, mas quando eu fui não tava.
Mas você vai deixar já pequeno? Por que você já não deixa ele de vez?
Tá minimizado aqui, é só clicar aqui depois.
Tá, e depois você põe no outro, né?
É.
Tá bom. É que eu vou ficar aqui só pra ver se o slide foi certinho.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Um saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por participar do primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for her kind invitation. Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Guberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Um saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por participar do primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for her kind invitation. Baixepá, Raihu, Paraguai. So my talk is about translanguaging. So you will see in this presentation divided in four main parts. Firstly, I'll mention about what I mean by translanguaging as a decolonizing practice. Secondly, I move on to the multilingual turn movement. Thirdly, I'll focus on how I have resignified this concept for my own context. And eu já perdi toda a sequência.
Quer começar uma...
Eu acho que se você não ficar aí vai ser melhor para mim, porque você desvia minha atenção.
Entendi.
Já vai ficar de cor.
Você quer que eu... Vamos começar uma coisa nova?
Não, continua aqui, só fica só ali,
Tá
porque eu já entendi agora.
Eu tô achando que é melhor eu ir lá embaixo esperar o sushi.
Mas quando você pode descer. Mas assim, só para não tem que ficar olhando aqui de você.
Entendeu? Eu acho que se você fizer sozinho, você vai fazer melhor. Fica mais tranquilo, você não acha?
Não sei.
Quer tentar? Eu desço.
Tá bom.
Então, peraí. Daqui a pouco a janta já tá aí também. Vai dar certo. Tá melhorando de agora, eu acho. Na verdade, você tem aquele plano A, que é o outro, né?
Uhum. Mas aqui já tá bom. Acho que ficou mais leve do jeito que você tá falando, né?
Sim, já. E já tá no jeito. É que não é fácil, né, amigo?
Uhum.
Raciocinar em outra língua não é fácil. Né?
Não, mas na outra língua não é problema. O problema é o vídeo mesmo, a sequência de pegar o negócio.
Tá, peraí. Deixa eu me retirar com a minha mão pra lá.
Hello everyone, um saludo a todos. Eu sou o professor Roberval Maciel. Desceu?
Desci, faz barulho, né?
Uhum. Hello everyone, I'm Professor Roberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Um saludo a todos. Estou muito honrado por estar aqui hoje no primeiro Congresso de Linguística Aplicada do Paraguai. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for her kind invitation. Baixepa, Haihu, Paraguai. So my talk is about translanguaging. As the idea is, hello everyone. I'm Professor Roberval Maciel from the State University of Mato Grosso do Sul. Um saludo a todos. I'd like to thank Professor Valentina for her kind invitation. Baixepa, Haihu, Paraguai. My presentation is about translanguaging. Translanguaging as a decolonial practice in language studies. So for this presentation, I'll divide it into 4 main parts. Firstly, I'll mention what I mean by translanguaging as decolonizing practice. Secondly, I'll move on multilingual turn movement. After that, I'll discuss about translanguage theory and practice. And finally, I'll focus on how I have resignified this concept for my local context, and particularly, I will strongly emphasize my interest to promote dialogues with Paraguayan applied linguists. I'd like to start by situating what I mean by decolonizing. This concept has been approached from many areas. I could mention some authors such as Menezes de Souza, Mignolo, Viveiro de Castro, Souza e Santos, among others. But I'd like to revisit the book Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature. So I like this quote here. So the author mentions, the choice of language and the use to which language is put is central to people's definitions of themselves in relation to their natural and social environment, indeed in relation to the entire universe. So according to the author, the colonization of politics is easy to be detected. The colonization of economy is easy to be detected. It defines knowledges, administration, economic exchanges, legal practices, and so on. The one of the mind is sometimes harder to be detected and eradicated. In this regard, language is very important. Now I'd like to move on to Professor Ophelia Garcia, who has contributed a lot to this discussion here. So as Ofelia Garcia reminds us, language is a tool of domination, conquest, and colonization throughout history. She calls attention to the limitation of the named languages as autonomous entities. The idea of languages as autonomous whole, where one could add to another whole, is problematic. On the other hand, if you think of language as complex, dynamic practices in which speakers engage to make meanings, named languages would reduce their power. So in this regard, when language is considered autonomous related to nation states, some labels such as the ones you can see here, foreign, second, heritage, first, emerge. Some language related to nation states imply that language can be added as separate wholes without taking into account that multilingual speakers' repertoires are much more complex. So it is important to understand that these three words here, subtractive, additive, and dynamic bilingualism, have different political and ideological and also epistemologies. So, again, quoting Garcia, translanguage is based on the idea that bilingual are not two monolinguals in one. So it is worth to remind that monolingual orientation and named languages have also been constructed by the process of standardization that leaves out practice of minoritized populations. As Garcia points out, there is an epistemological difference between theoretical position on language contact and their ideas about borrowing, code switching, language interference, etc., and the concept of translanguaging. Language contact studies start with named languages as categories, and then look at across these named languages categories. On the other hand, as Garcia mentions, translanguage takes the internal perspective of the speaker. Their mental grammars have been developed in social interactions with others. For these bilingual speakers, their language features are simply their own. She points out that translanguage is much more than going across languages. It is going beyond named language and taking the internal view of the speaker's language use. So this invites us to think about the prefix trans. So the multilingual term is believed to have started an important movement towards a paradigm shift in applied linguistics. This brings me to the idea of trans. Such a transformative movement has presented us with critique of monoglossic, structural, and rationalist concepts that have commonly guided language theories and pedagogical practices for so many years. As an alternative to hegemonic language ideologies, other proposals such as translanguage studies have considered the expansion of linguistic and educational policies and practices, which could potentially challenge authoritative discourses and normative epistemologies. Such an approach can likewise contribute to question oppressive, monoglossic, monolithic views of language and culture in many different fields of knowledge besides language education. In this regard, language educations are invited to decolonize their minds in relation to traditional views of language and practices, to reconsider other theories for second language acquisition, to rethink learning beliefs oriented by second language acquisition, such as the ones you see here, English only, Spanish only, communicative competence, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that, going back to Garcia's metaphoric expression, we can look through other lenses. In one recent interview with Professor Suresh Kanagaraja with my colleague Claudio Hilsdorf Rocha, I asked him, what is the impact of translanguage theory in applied linguistics and language education? And he replied, I think there is a very slow beginning in this sense, that the dominant approach needs to be first questioned. It takes a lot of effort to rethink a lot of old practices. So in some senses, there is still some resistance to translingualism. But the good thing is, it is starting. I see more and more, a lot of teachers are thinking about it. They are trying to make space for translanguaging. Everything different is difficult and slow. In the beginning, you may have to rethink a lot of old practices, and you have to imagine, for example, new possibilities. But after a while, it might become fairly common. So this was published in one of the Brazilian journal called Revista X from the Federal University of Paraná. So in general, translanguage can be understood as dynamic, fluid practice that transcend borders among languages, linguistic varieties, and other semiotic systems. Just to be more concrete, in a sense, to be more specific, I will discuss how translanguage have been addressed. So in order to do so, I take Canagaraja's 4 main principles. However, it is important not to frame them in isolation. So he offers these 4 principles here, and I add one more. So firstly, translanguage transcends the language borders, or transcends the idea of named languages. It also transcends verbal resources and considers other semiotic resources. The third, it transcends the distinctions between text and context and include different semiotic relegation to context and temporal space. And fourth, it indexualizes transformation and challenges our understanding that language as regulated by existing context and power relation. And one more that I'm particularly interested with my colleague Claudia to include other elements into this talk here. So the idea that the incorporation of other elements such as meaning, feelings, affect, assemblage, this is very much a dialogue with philosophy, for example, especially Deleuze-Guattari and some others. Now to go to something more practical, I will show how we have reframed this in our context in Brazil. So this here, as far as the first notion is concerned, that is, to transcend language borders and autonomous languages, this is an interaction between Bolivian students and a teacher in a Brazilian school in Brazil. So these students, they are born in Bolivia, but their mothers cross the border to deliver their babies. They go back to Bolivia, and then after some years, they go back to study in Brazil with very limited proficiency in Portuguese. So translanguage has a huge whole role into this process. So as you can see here, so the teacher is translanguage with the students. So in this sense, translanguage can help to maximize students' and teachers' linguistic resources in the process of mitigating problems of knowledge construction. This is something from Ofelia Garcia, 2014. And again, in this other interaction here, similarly, in this other interaction, translanguage empowers both teachers and students and powers relations and focuses on teacher and learning processes, enhancing their experience and meaning making. Translanguage has to do with the development of metacognitive and metalinguistic awareness and the promotion of flexible instructional arrangements that leverage all features of the language repertoires of bilingual students. I'm sure that very similar context here in the border of Brazil and Paraguay. And in this other context, we see the same picture in these 2 slides. On your right-hand side, you have the Pepsi and the other as well. But it's not just the picture itself, to understand this as the trend, the movement is fluid. So in the social semiotic approach, so in the first one in Portuguese we said, desejamos a você Halloween aterrorizante. In the second one, todo mundo sonha ser grande herói. So In a social semiotic approach, language is central to other modes that sign makers can choose for meaning making and social identification. So in this sense, translanguage for us include all meaning makes and modes. In other words, the focus can be broader. So we can include the need to transcend verbal resources in order to involve other semiotic resources and modality in the meaning-making process. The next slide, I will show another work that I've supervised in Brazil. They are undergraduate students. They were addressing issues of hip-hop, and we were trying to address hip-hop as a complex way of considering translanguage here, so transgressing cultural borders as well. So we are talking about, much more than just language. So in this case, translanguage can help students to engage their entire linguistic, multimodal, and discursive repertoires. So recognize the hybrid, fluid, and contingent use of languages. So translanguage also calls for the need to legitimize other ways to produce meanings that they are different from the conventional, dominant, elitist, discursive, and linguistic forms. Also, in this slide, translanguage was used to analyze the interactions between language and space. This is a market in Brazil where there you have a rich linguistic landscape. Many people, they are translanguage, they are negotiating meaning in this space. So in this concept, translanguage can show its contribution by making visible the complexity of language exchanges among people with different histories and release histories and understanding that have been buried with fixed language identity constrained by nation states. This is very much influential by Alistair Pennycook's work. And finally, this is a new research that has been conducted in the last few years, is the interaction of translanguage and medical context. So here I address the relationship between translanguage and health studies. So this study tried to transcend the notion of text, context, this distinction of text and context, and highlighted how a wide range of other semiotic features previously relegated to time, space, and context plays a crucial role as far as communication is concerned. So other aspects here, such as you can see here, we are talking about multisensorial literacies in medical context, understanding them as distributed, situated, culturally specific. So we are bringing other issues of translanguage that we're talking in a broader sense as an assemblage in this specific context here, but also bring other aspects of affect, feeling, meaning. I think this is important for medical education. So other aspects such as meaning and feelings, as well as other multisensorial literacies towards a more humanistic medical student education include, for example, touch, viewing, among other contexts. So the following slide, you see other work that I've done with them. This is in the surgery room. So we were analyzing translanguaging into this concept and bringing issues such as semiotic assemblage, spatial repertoires, lexicality, agency of things. So other ways of looking to this space, the relationship of light, color, blood, the hierarchies in this space. So all this was published last year. So this is one new study that we brought things from multimodality, and now we are considering other things in translanguage because I think it's broader than this sense. And finally, together with my colleague Claudia Hilsdorf Rocha, there is another one here. Yeah, this is another comparing surgery room and maternity, another work, translanguage medical space. Again, addressing issues of meaning making, spatial repertoire, and multisensorial literacies. And finally, together with my colleague Claudia Hilsdorf from Unicamp in Brazil, our interest in Translaguaging started as a result of our work that we have done together, which involved a debate and the investigation on language education in Brazil from a transgressive point of view. But based on the literature available in the field of translanguaging, our focus expanded from such discussions to include reflections upon the possible connections between discursive approach to language and translingual orientation. So our attention to translanguaging and the process of meaning making from a multimodal and multisensorial point of view, highlighting the role of affect in language practices. So in our latest work, so we have addressed these aspects here. So translingual approach to language and language education is strongly committed to social justice, to the fight for more plural and non-hegemonic discourses, ideologies, and practices. Bearing in mind, it seems fair to say that there are many challenges to be faced into this area. And to conclude, I'd like to say that I have a great interest to strengthen collaboration between the Brazilian applied linguistics and Paraguayan applied linguistics, particularly on the issues of teacher education, translanguage, and transculturality from a post-colonial point of view. So I had the chance to know the University of Paraguay some years ago, so I think we have very much in common. I think this is a space that we can develop more work on into this area. So again, I thank very much Professor Valentina for this opportunity, and it was a huge pleasure for me to be here today. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado.